I mean, and let's be real. I'm just doing this because, I want to be that guy that's like, well, I've been into him for a really long time, before everybody else got there, you know. I'm a douchebag.
Digital gramophone makes no sense.
Hey guys, it's John, the Digital Gramophone. Today I'm gonna do another artist spotlight, and this one is, I've done a couple of artist spotlights before. Did a brief little retrospective on Sturgill Simpson in one of my recent videos, and then I did the Bruce Springsteen thing, talking about my top 20 songs, and I did a Deer Hunter one early on. And those were, kind of fun to do. And if someone ever really came across those, anybody randomly, since it's on YouTube, then, so be it, and that's cool. If they want to join in on the conversation or tell me I'm a fucking idiot, whatever. Today, my spotlight on Jason Isbell, I will say, is more because for my friends here in the VC. I'm a huge Jason Isbell fan, and I'm sure there have been some folks out there. The vinyl community is a vast, infinite, matrix of folks, and there's tons of people out there that I haven't come across. And I'm sure someone has talked about his albums. I've seen Steve Carlson mention him, and then Dylan talked about him. Noble Records talked about him, some videos a while back. That had a little bit to do with me. But I'm a huge, huge Jason Isbell fan. And so I thought that this would be a good artist spotlight to do, just to kind of give some of you guys out there that I have regular interaction with a little bit more of an insight into, my music fan DNA. Now, I also want to clear up that I'm not trying to come across like I'm some kind of Jason Isbell biographer, okay? There is a wealth of information out there on Jason Isbell. He's done countless podcasts and interviews. He's a very open guy. He's constantly on Twitter. There is a wealth of knowledge out there about him. So if you don't want to watch this video, then fine, go ahead. Just seek that out. It's well worth your attention. I have a little bit of a pet peeve when people get on the VC and they just read something off of a Wikipedia page and they don't really talk about their sources and where they got that information from. It's, who are we trying to fool? Right? But, so I just want to be clear about that. So, around 2008 or 2009, one of my really good friends, one of my really close friends, brought me a burned CD of Jason Isbell's first solo album. And, I wasn't really blown away by it. He knew that I was a big fan of alt country and Americana. He and I shared a love for specifically Ryan Adams and Whiskey Town, and then, other folks like Steve Earle and, you name it. And so he thought that I would really be into Jason Isbell. And I said, I'll give it a shot. But like I said, I wasn't really wowed right away. And I felt like at the time the album was kind of disjointed, and, it just didn't knock my socks off. Well, then he took me to see him live for the first time in Augusta, Georgia, at a venue called Sky City, which is a really cool music room. And I was blown away. It was such a great performance, and his band was so incredible. And hearing that music live just changed my entire opinion on him. And sometimes, bands will do that, right? Probably from about 2009 to 2011, me and that friend of mine saw him at least 10 times. He was, back in that day, touring 300 days a year. There was always a chance to see him. There was always a chance. And pretty much anytime he rolled in our tri-state area, we would just go and and check them out. So yeah, so that's kind of where it started for me. And over the years, I've followed his career, and I've just become, he's my favorite singer-songwriter out there. And in my opinion, really the best in the game at it. And there are a lot of talented singer-songwriters now. We've kind of had a renaissance of that in recent years, I feel. A lot of those very talented wordsmiths and song writers kind of write in a little bit more of an abstract tone, and Jason has a way of telling stories and writing songs that people can instantly relate to. And I just, just like I said, a huge fan. I've said it about 10 times, so yeah. But let's talk a little bit about his past. It's gonna be a little while before I show some records, guys. Sorry. Jason was born in the town of Green Hill, Alabama, which is in North Alabama, just south of the Tennessee line, and it's about 30 minutes north of Muscle Shoals. Those of you who are music fans should know Muscle Shoals and its legendary music history. His father was a house painter. His mother was an interior designer. His grandfather on his father's side was a Pentecostal preacher and also a musician. Music was a big thing in his grandfather's church. He was a big fan of gospel and bluegrass. All of his aunts and uncles also were musicians and played music. And at the age of 6 or 7, his grandfather gave him a mandolin because it was easier to hold and taught him how to play on the mandolin. You know, he later obviously picked up the guitar and, started a garage band, and was also in a country covers band that would tend to get more gigs. And that country covers band would play things like Garth Brooks and Alan Jackson and Keith Whitley, things like that. He is, however, a musician that has a wide variety of influences. The major ones that he'll mention obviously are guys like songwriters like Neil Young and Bob Dylan and Bruce Springsteen. But he grew up around his parents' music, right? We all do. And his dad was a big arena rock fan. So he's mentioned that Free, the Fire and Water album by Free was a big one for him as a child. Led Zeppelin 4. And his dad was also into, kind of older sounding country, like guys like Merle Haggard, Hank Jr. And then, of course, if you're a kid in Alabama, it's hard to escape Leonard Skinner, So Leonard Skinner was huge as well. His mom was really into the singer-songwriters. John Prine, John Hyatt, James Taylor, Carole King, Bonnie Raitt. So he grew up loving that music too. And then on the radio, he was drawn to a little bit of more of the sophisticated, more intelligent pop at the time in the late 80s, like Crowded House, Squeeze, and Till Tuesday. He's mentioned all of those artists before. He's right around my age. So growing up, being a teen in the 90s, of course, Nirvana was, the end all for almost everybody. So he was kind of that long-haired, guitar playing kid, right? But I would say his largest influence was just the Muscle Shoals area itself. There weren't a lot of bars in that town, and the alcohol laws were very strict. So a lot of the live music in that area, this would be Muscle Shoals, also Florence and Sheffield, towns of Florence and Sheffield. A lot of the live music in that area was at the restaurants, the local restaurants. So Jason would go to these restaurants, he'd go to these local bar and grills, and he'd sit in and watch the live music. And the guys that were playing the music were the session musicians from that area, including big names like guys like Spooner Oldham and David Hood. David Hood of the Swampers. Those of you also know them as, the Muscle Shoals rhythm section. the guys that were the session musicians at Fame Studios, and then later went on and started their own studio. Played on hundreds of tracks. I don't know why I'm saying this, but just for those that don't know, obviously hundreds of like classic R&B from the late 60s and early 70s artists like Aretha Franklin and Wilson Pickett. You know, those guys are crazy, huge in American music. So how fortunate was he, you know, to get exposure to these guys? He's got to sit in with them. And they kind of took him under his wing and would tell him stories about what it was like being a professional musician and growing up playing around with these huge stars and, you know, hanging out with the Rolling Stones and shit like that, you know. And so he got early exposure. They told him everything. They were very honest. And they told him everything about the drugs and the women, the successes, the failures, everything about it. And what an amazing education that had to be, you know, especially for someone that was an aspiring musician like himself. You know, David Hood in particular really took him under his wing. And as Jason has said in interviews, you know, still calls him son to this day. You know, Jason went to Memphis, studied creative writing. He never finished. He says he only has one course left, which is crazy to me. But anyway, during his time in college, he would still come back, you know, when he was out of school to the Muscle Shoals area. And there was a house in the area that was owned by two guys that were in the music industry. Dick Cooper, who was like an industry guy and kind of, I think he had worked with Skinner before. And then Scott Byers, who was Scott Boyer, who was a local musician that played in Greg Allman's band. And those guys would have these huge house parties, and all these musicians in the area would congregate and come and hang out at that house. That's where Jason met Patterson Hood. Patterson Hood's David Hood's son. Those of you that know the DriveBy Truckers know that that's Patterson's band. And one night, the DriveBy Truckers were supposed to play a house concert at that house, and their guitarist flaked on them and didn't show. And Jason sat in with the band and held his own. You know, he'd had a couple of their records, knew kind of some of their songs, but as a lead player, as long as you can kind of hold your own, you know, you're good. So some months later, that guitarist was kicked out of the band, and Jason joined the DriveBy Truckers. And that was right after this album, Southern Rock Opera, had come out. And this album was initially released in 2000, but then it had picked up some steam, and then it was reissued by Lost Highway Records. And so it got a lot more exposure, and they kind of had, their tour for this album kind of had a second wind, and Jason was a part of that tour. They were playing in front of like 1,000 folks a night in clubs and stuff, and you know, it was a big deal for him, you know. Playing in that band, being around those guys, it was he was getting exposed to all kinds of other music that he had never really been into before. You know, the DriveBy Truckers were part of the Athens scene, which was a very hip scene, you know, very hip underground scene. And, you know, Patterson was into a lot of bands like that influenced him. You know, the Pixies, Guided by Voices, Vic Chestnut, and you know, like Neutral Milk Hotel. You know, so Jason got some exposure to that stuff, and that was huge for him as well. The first album that he appeared on was Decoration Day. And the two songs that he wrote for this album were the title track. How great is that? You're for the first album that you're on, and one of the songs you've written is the title track for the album. And then Decoration Day is a song that's kind of like a Hatfield and McCoy's kind of thing, you know, a family feud that results in violence and death and all kinds of great shit like that. And the other song being Outfit, which is an amazing song and a Southern working class anthem. It was inspired by his father. And the chorus is kind of a, you know, a lot of Southern fatherly advice, you know, if you will. That song in particular would go on to be Jason's calling card for many years. It was always the song that, even after he left the Truckers, fans would scream, "Play Outfit," and it's an amazing, amazing song. It really is one of the greatest kind of working class Southern anthems ever written. It really is. It's a fantastic, fantastic tune.
5 years in a St. Florine foundry they called Industrial Park. I worked hospital maintenance, tech school, just to memorize Frigidaire part. But I got to missing your mama, and I got to missing you too. So I went back to painting for my old man, and I guess that's what I'll always do. So don't let them take who you are, boy, and don't try to be who you ain't. Don't let me catch you in Kendall with a bucket of wealthy man's pain. Don't call what you're wearing an outfit. Don't ever say your car is broke. Don't sing with a fake British accent, boy, and don't act like your family's a joke. Have fun and stay clear of the needle. Call home on your sister's birthday. Don't tell them you're bigger than Jesus. Don't give it away. Don't give it away.
The next album that Jason would be on with the DriveBy Truckers was The Dirty South. Came out in 2004, and he got 3 songs on this album. One being We Ain't Never Gonna Change, Ain't Never Gonna Change, which is just a great Southern rock song, and Goddamn Lonely Love, which is the closer on this, a bittersweet, beautiful kind of like love song, tear in my beer ballad. And then Danko Manuel, which was written about, inspired by Rick Danko and Richard Manuel from the band. Danko Manuel is just a awesome, haunting song. And he had written it, he was reading Levon Helm's autobiography at the time. And Levon Helm spent many years after that talking about those 2 guys and how sad it was, what happened to them. And Jason was thinking about, their fate and what it was like being a touring musician and, how he could avoid that. And that's what, inspired that song. Up until he joined the DriveBy Truckers, Jason had managed to kind of avoid things like substance abuse and alcohol. He was never really a huge binge drinker in college or anything like that. But once he joined that band, things got a little wiry. And they were known for taking a big bottle of Jack and passing it around on stage, during their set. And Jason would continue on that trend, that tradition when he started his own band later. And things got pretty crazy, Jason was married to the bass player in DriveBy Truckers, Shauna Tucker. This was the first album she appeared on. And they married young and probably just never really should have gotten married. And that weighed on him a lot. That contributed to his self-medication, if you will. The last album that Jason would appear on with the DriveBy Truckers was 2006's A Blessing and a Curse. This is an okay album. It's not what you were accustomed to from the DriveBy Truckers, they decided to kind of just put out like a garage rock record, you know, and it was kind of inspired more by all of the indie rock that they were really big into, that would just kind of slightly sneak into their sound on prior albums. You know, the sloppiness, the kind of slacker attitude. This kind of went for it a little bit more. Jason wrote the two songs, Easy on Yourself and Daylight. And they weren't really, you know, they're not highlights in his song canon by any means. In 2007, he was asked, approached by the band, and, you know, they asked him, you know, to take some time off, clean himself up a little bit. And he said, okay, fine, that's what you want, but I don't want you to continue to tour as this band without me. Which is kind of a ballsy move, because it wasn't his band. They had existed well before he ever joined. And they said, okay, fine, you're not in anymore. And, you know, he left the band. Now, I think he already kind of had some aspirations to move on. But obviously, he was now divorced from Shauna Tucker. That couldn't have helped things. And, you know, having his own aspirations to kind of be a songwriter and not just have 2 or 3 songs on an album, you know, I guess he kind of wanted to do his own thing too. So, you know, when it first happened, it was announced as amicable, but it really wasn't. He had kind of outstayed his welcome. But, you know, he would continue his ways as he went on to being a solo artist. You know, and I forgot to mention earlier that in his early 20s, Jason was signed by Fame Studios to a publishing deal. So he was a serious songwriter. It was something that he was very serious about, you know, early on. He continued to work under that contract while he was with the Truckers, and I think on into his first solo album, which was recorded at Fame Studios, and it's called Sirens of the Ditch. Came out in 2007. He was working on this while he was still in the Truckers because Brad Morgan, the drummer from the Truckers, Shauna Tucker, and Patterson Hood all appear on this. Spooner Oldham is on this album. And it was co-produced by Jason and Patterson Hood. Now, this is a 2018 reissue that has some bonus tracks on it. This is the album I believe Steve Carlson talked about in one of his videos before. I had a 2007 press of this, but when this came out, I just decided to trade that one. It didn't have any extra value, so I traded it to Dylan at one of his pop-ups. But this is a good album, and anybody would be happy to have this be released as their first, you know, solo album. But he definitely would take leaps and bounds forward as a songwriter from here. But some of the highlights are the first track, Brand New Actress, which was written about Lana Clarkson's murder at the hand of Phil Spector. But actually, you know, when this came out, he hadn't been convicted of the murder yet. So it's kind of interesting that he decided to write about it then. One of the better songs on this album that he still plays a lot to this day is Dress Blues, which was inspired by a Marine from his hometown who was killed in action in the Iraq War. And the sentiment of that song is just so eloquent. There's a huge variety of sound on this album. Kind of an alt-rock bend, but then also some blues with the song Hurricanes and Hand Grenades. It has a very kind of Gulf Coast blues sound to it. And then, you know, the song In a Razor's Town, he could have written that for Jackson Browne. It's got the perfect tone and would have fit in on any of his 70s output for sure. But yeah, this is a cool solo album, and you know, if anybody wanted to start here and go from there, I wouldn't object to it at all. Not at all.
can you see from your window? I can't see anything from mine. Flags on the side of the highway and scripture on grocery store signs. Maybe 18 was too early. Maybe 30 or 40 is too. Do you get your chance to make peace with a man before he sent down his angels for you? And mamas and grandmamas love you, 'cause that's all they know how to do. But you never planned on the bombs in the sand or sleeping in your dress blue. Your wife said this all would be funny when you came back home in a week. You turned 22, we'd all celebrate you in a bar or a tent by the creek. And your baby would just about be here, and your very last tour would be up. But you won't be back. They're all dressing in black and drinking sweet tea from styrofoam cups. And mamas and grandmamas love you. American boys hate to lose. But you never planned on the bombs in the sand or sleeping in your dress blue. They got the high school gymnasium ready. It's full of flowers and old Legionnaire. Nobody showed up to protest, just sniffle and stare. But there's red, white, and blue in the rafters, and there's silent old men from the Corps. And what did they say when they shipped you away to fight somebody's Hollywood war? And nobody here could forget you. You showed us what we had to lose, but you bombs in the sand, or sleeping in your dress blue. No, you never planned on the bombs in the sand, or sleeping in your dress blue. Thank you. I wrote that song for Matthew Conley from Green Hill, Alabama, for his friends and his family.